I'm sure you read this kind of story before. The one epic adventure story that builds up throughout the entire story to the final confrontation between the hero and the villain. Finally, at the climax of the story, the villain meets the hero for the first time. They duel it out, and just when the hero looks like he's about to fail, the hero gives the winning blow and rises victorious. Despite the epic location and cool moves that both the hero and the villain made during that fight scene, something about it kind of feels flat. Yeah, sure, it's kind of cool and all, but something feels missing. What is it about some stories that when the hero finally defeats the villain, you get that wonderful cathartic feeling, and then other climaxes when the hero defeats a villain, it's kind of just very underwhelming. And just like any video I make, it always starts off like a question like this, is like I see something that I like, I see something similar that I dislike, and then I ask why. Why is one climax awesome and amazing and satisfying, and the other climax kind of underwhelming and kind of even boring? Most people probably just go about the day and like, I like this, I don't like that, move on with life. But me being a writer, I really want to write a great climax in my story. So I end up asking a lot of questions when I watch the movies and read books. So I do what I always do, which is I kind of compare. I look at a bunch of climaxes from great stories, bad stories. I look at a bunch of different climaxes, ones I love, and others I cannot. And the answer I found may surprise you actually, because what makes a satisfying climax actually isn't anything to do with what actually happens. It's actually about the relationship between your villain and your hero. The relationship between your villain and your hero is arguably the most important relationship in your story. Now, before you come out with all your arguments against my little theory, let me explain myself. So your main villain, your antagonist of the story, represents the main conflict of your story. And ultimately, your story at heart is about your hero overcoming obstacles, your conflict, to achieve his goal. So in other words, the relationship between your hero and the conflict, or your villain, is the centerpiece of any story, including yours. Now, there's a lot of different types of antagonists for your stories. There might be an actual physical bad guy, villain type of guy, or it may be actually the internal demons inside your own character. That's the main villain of your story. Either way, the protagonist and the antagonist, this push-pull, is the heart of your story. The story usually starts when the conflict begins, or while it's in the midst of the conflict, and then it ends when the conflict is resolved. Protagonist and antagonist rivalry, I think I said that right, adds emotional intensities to your story, creates compelling conflict, and also gives a deep dive into both the antagonist and protagonist's psychology. Demonstrate different shades of their personality, build up to a breathtaking climax, and then finally wrap up a poignant theme. And sometimes it can even add that little touch of bittersweetness to your story that will stick with readers after they finish reading your book. Okay, so that sounds like a lot, but in today's video, I'm going to be showing you how the best hero-villain relationships result in some of the best climaxes to stories. So I'll be showing you the fundamental keys for your hero-villain relationship so you can pull it off like a pro. Alright, so I'll be splitting up this video into three different parts. And the first one being setup, in which conflict and theme are established. Like any strong, long-lasting relationship, you need probably not long-lasting in the case of hero and villain, but any strong relationship like the one between hero and villain, it needs to have a good foundation. So yeah, the first step into creating a great hero and villain rivalry is to set the foundation. And the three keys to making a great foundation is 1, motivation, 2, points of connection, and 3, reflection. So let's get into what all those things mean. Number 1, motivation. and more specifically, the hero and the villain's motivation. So just like you want your hero to have a motivation for whatever they're doing, you also want your villain to have a motivation for whatever he's trying to achieve. And when choosing your villain's motivation, you have about two options. One, you make the villain's motivation reflect and disagree with the hero's motivation. So they're both opposites of each other. Like in Lord of the Rings, where Gollum wanted to possess the ring and Frodo wanted to destroy it. Two opposite motivations. The second option of motivation for your villains is it to be similar to the hero's motivation, but their method of action are different. So yeah, they could still have both the same motivation to achieve a goal, but they have different methods of actions, one method being harmful and the other not being harmful. Like how both Batman and Joker fight for the heart of Gotham, but they have very different methods of action. The reason why these methods work so well is they not only set up conflict, but they also give opportunity to develop your theme. And any opportunity you have to develop your theme, you should take. It adds so much more depth to your story and makes it so much more memorable. Having opposite yet reflective motivations can show different sides of your theme. And having both characters, the villain and the hero, represent different ideals is a great way to build up to an ending that represents your theme. And then we go to the second type of motivation, which is similar motivations, where the theme explores questions about different methods of action. Furthermore, this type of motivation can be really great for redemption arcs. Say your villain and your hero are motivated by greed, then when the hero interacts with the villain, then it forces him to look at himself and his motivation in sort of a dark mirror, so to speak. It causes the hero to look at his own motivations in a different light and question if this is actually a good thing that he's doing. In Avatar: The Last Airbender, both Zuko and Azula were motivated by honor and winning the approval of their father. When Zuko saw his sister Azula succeeding at this, it tempted him to go further down this dark path and work even harder at winning honor and approval from their father. But at the same time, it also made him question whether or not it was actually worth it, because he had a clear example right in front of him. Did he really want to end up like Azula? But the bottom line with these two different motivations, they're both awesome and great, but whatever one adds the most conflict to your story, then choose that one. And when you're trying to add these motivations to your hero and villain, ask yourself these questions. What is your hero's motivation to achieve his goal? What is your villain's motivation to achieve his goal? Are these two motivations similar or reflect each other? How does this bring them into conflict with each other? And how does this flesh out your theme? The second step to creating a nice foundation between your villain and your hero is a point of connection. So the next thing you need to do to create a great and dynamic and strong relationship between your hero and your villain is a point of connection between them. A really good sign that you chose a good type of connection between your hero and villain is if it adds even more conflict and tension to your story. So what do I mean by points of connection? All it means is something personal between the characters that connects them in a more personal way than maybe just I'm trying to defeat you and stop you or whatever. It's a more personal connection and human connection between each other. A very common point of connection between hero and villain is that they're family, like Luke and Darth Vader and Zuko and Azula. Or another point of connection between the two characters is that one of the characters deeply hurt the other character in their past, like Mr. Incredible and Syndrome. Or it could be that the villain used to be a role model for the hero when they were young, like Ernesto de Rocou for Miguel in Coco, and Charles Mutz for Carl in Up. Or it could be that the hero sees himself in the villain, like how Frodo sees himself in Gollum and Woody sees himself in Lotso. Now there are endless amounts of ways you can add a connection between your villain and your hero. They could have the same dark secret. They could have the same superpowers. They have similar backstory. They have a mutual friend, have the same struggles, love the same girl, and were trained by the same mentor. You can probably think of dozens more of different types of point of connections between your hero and your villain. So choose the one that works best in your story between your characters and adds the most tension and conflict and relevance to your story. For example, in Prince of Egypt, in the beginning, we see both Moses and Ramsey being brothers and best friends. This has heartbreaking conflict and tension throughout the entire story as we watch their relationship crumble. We feel conflicted as we want Moses to free his people, but we also want Moses and Ramsey to stay friends. But we know we can't have both. The closer Moses gets to his goal, the more their friendship crumbles. Until finally, at the end, when we have the joy and satisfaction that Moses finally frees his people and achieves his goal. But there's also a bit of bittersweetness as their friendship is completely and utterly destroyed. So here are some questions to ask yourself to help you add a point of connection between your hero and villain. What is a point of connection you can add between your hero and your villain? What similarity can you add to connect them personally? How does this add an extra layer of conflict and tension to their relationship? How does this cause dread if the goal is completed? Now we move on to the third point of creating this strong foundation, and that is reflection. So the heroes and villains similarities and differences. So now you want to highlight the hero and the villain's similarities and their differences. So now when the hero and the villain look at each other, it's kind of like a reflection in a way. This can be contrasting or similar skills, like how Batman is a skilled martial artist and the Joker, on the other hand, uses his brain to achieve his goals. It could also be similar or contrasting backstories. Both Woody and Lotso were abandoned by their child. It could also be similar or contrasting roles. Both Gollum and Frodo were hobbits and ring bearers. And there can be so many different things you can add to add similarities or differences to your character to create a reflection. For example, both Thanos and Tony Stark are kind of like surrogate fathers in a way. Thanos and Gamora, and Tony Stark and Peter Parker. In Infinity War, both Thanos and Tony Stark lose both their respective children. Now that's the similarity, but the difference comes in with how they did it. Thanos willingly sacrifices Gamora without a second thought, but Tony Stark, on the other hand, is devastated. And this really highlights the false love of Thanos and highlights the true fatherly love Tony Stark has for Peter Parker. So here's some questions to ask yourself so you can create a reflection between your hero and your villain. What meaningful similarities does your villain and hero have? What meaningful differences do the hero and villain have? How do these similarities and differences add to your theme? How do these similarities and differences reflect each other? And how does it flesh out the relationship as the story progresses? Now we move on to part 2, where the villain throws plot conflict and thematic conflict at the hero. Like I mentioned before, your villain is the main conflict of your story. A lot of the big obstacles that your hero faces should be somehow connected to your villain. Or even better, all your main obstacles tie into and advance your theme. So I know I've been talking about theme a lot in this story, even though it's mainly about villains and heroes. And I do want to go on a whole video just about theme, but just in case anybody's confused about all this theme stuff I'm talking about in this video, I'll briefly go over what theme looks like in your story. Basically, your theme is a lesson your hero learns throughout the course of his journey. Basically, at the beginning of your story, your hero believes this lie, and this lie is the main driving factor to all of his decisions. And while the hero tries to achieve his goal, he keeps losing and losing until all the way to the darkest moment. This lie that he believes leads him to the very darkest moment of the story where he finally can't take it anymore. This leads him to the ending of the novel, the climax, where he has to choose between the truth or the lie. And it's this big moment, this big dramatic moments, and then he finally chooses the truth, which helps him win and defeat the villain and achieve his goal at the end. Now, thematic conflict then is conflict that forces the character to look head on at his lie that he believes the most and the truth he needs to learn the most. So now we need to develop them throughout the story by having them clash. So here are a few ideas on how you can do that. The villain makes the hero question his beliefs. The villain forces your protagonist to make tough decisions. The villain tempts the hero to do the wrong thing. The villain leads the hero down a wrong path. The villain voices the main character's own thoughts and doubts about the truth he needs to learn. The villain makes the hero regret past decisions. The villain attacks the hero's weakness. The villain hurts the hero in a way no one has ever done before. The villain shows the dark side of the hero's goal and tries to convince him it's not worth fighting for. The villain turns the hero against his own friends who are trying to guide him toward the truth. The villain forces the protagonist into a role he's been avoiding for a long time, like in How to Train Your Dragon 2, where Drago kills Hiccup's father, forcing Hiccup into the role of the chief, which in the beginning is established as something that Hiccup really fears and really doesn't want to do, because he doesn't want to take on the responsibility of being chief of his village because he can never live up to his father's legacy. And there are so many different ways villains can add conflict and obstacles at the hero. So next time you read a book or watch a movie, keep an eye out for all the different ways the villain throws conflict at your hero. Conflict that is both very difficult to overcome, but also advances and fleshes out the theme of your story. Now I move on to the third part of making a dynamic and memorable relationship between your hero and villain. That is part 3, the end, in which all the conflict is wrapped up while simultaneously demonstrating your theme. And finally, now that you've set the core of your rivalry and developed rich conflict and tension between the two, now it's time to play it all off with the climax of your story. Hit all of the beats of your theme to make it deeply resonate with your readers. Throughout the story, we create this arc between the hero and the villain. So now at the end, it's time to tie up all the loose ends and bring it to a satisfying close. Everything you've set up with their conflict and relationship is now about to be paid off. This is what will make your climax so satisfying, when everything you've set up and developed throughout the entirety of your story finally comes to an end and wraps up in a deep and multi-layered way. And this is in what writers call the climactic moments, when Frodo's mercy and kindness is what ultimately destroyed the ring. Because he had kindness and mercy to Gollum, he ended up taking the fall and destroying the ring in Mount Doom and achieving the ultimate goal that Frodo set out to achieve. It pays off all the mercy and kindness Frodo showed throughout the story, and it is the final event that wraps up the theme in a very satisfying and meaningful way. In the climactic moment in Endgame is Iron Man's love and sacrifice, which ultimately defeats Thanos, who believes that you need to sacrifice other people's lives and trade other people's lives to get what he wanted. Zuko's desire for peace and helping other people gave him the strength to overcome Azula, whose greed for power and perfection ends up spiraling her into insanity. Now you have the climactic moment that wraps up the main conflict and the theme of the story. Now just wrap up all the little other subplots that you may have developed and created throughout your story. So if your hero and villain have any other subplots that go beyond just their main roles of hero versus villain, so this is where you wrap up those subplots. So in Star Wars, Luke didn't just defeat the villain of the story, Darth Vader, he also got to meet and say goodbye to his father at the end. If they didn't show this meaningful moment between Luke and his father, then this whole subplot of Darth Vader being Luke's father would have seemed half-baked and random. But because this scene is at the end of Star Wars, Darth Vader and Luke are one of the most famous hero-villain relationships of all time. At the end of Prince of Egypt, Moses didn't just defeat Pharaoh at the end. He also tried to comfort his brother when his son died. Although Ramsay rejects this gesture, it's still a very meaningful scene in the movie. It finally establishes that their friendship is completely and wholly broken, thus wrapping up the subplots of them being brothers. So here's some questions to ask yourself. What is your climactic moment of your story? How is the villain defeated? What does this say about your theme? What does it say about the hero and villain's relationship? What are the after effects of the climax that result from everything you built up and developed throughout your story? Oftentimes in books and movies, hero and villain relationships are often looked over, which often leads to generic villains, which often leads to generic conflicts, which then leads to a generic story. But by implementing these 3 steps, making a foundation between your hero and your villain with their motivation, points of connection and reflection, having the villain throw plots and thematic conflict at your hero that has the hero question what he believes and the main questions of the theme, finally wrapping up the main plots and all the subplots in a thematic way, your hero-villain relationships becomes very, very uniquely yours. And your theme will hit so much harder. But I understand there's a lot and lots of steps in this video. It may be overwhelming. Don't worry about it. Don't feel like you have to get every single thing right in this video, or all this is just guidelines for you to try out, play with, and implement in your story and see how it works. To give you ideas and inspiration on how you can develop and deepen your relationship with your hero and your villain. Don't feel like you have to do everything that I mentioned in this video, but I do encourage you to try some things out and see how it works in your story. See how the relationship grows or changes or makes it more unique and memorable. Take one step forward at a time, try one new thing out at a time, and most importantly, have fun. Building character relationships in your story, it can be a blast of a time. It can be amazing. I love it so much. That's why we go in these crazy, deep videos like this. So yeah, just have fun with it. Try out new things, develop it, think about it, dream about it, whatever. I hope you can have a great time while developing your hero and villain relationship. So now I have a very important question to ask you, which is, what is your favorite villain versus hero relationship or rivalry of all time? So comment down below what your favorite is. Thank you so much for watching. Take heart, be courageous, and keep on writing.